My Melanin. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Kimberell Eventide, and today I am going to discuss all about the kindness of elves. The reason why I have decided to make a video about this is because I know that our world, I think, needs a little bit more kindness. And I really do feel that Tolkien kind of felt the same way, especially during the time that he wrote The Fellowship of the Rings. And he wrote, was beginning to build the story of Lord of the Rings and develop the Elven language and develop the Elven realms. I believe that he also felt that the world needed more kindness examples because he was alive during a time of, World War I, and he was actually experiencing what war was doing to people, and that is not an act of kindness at all. And so I wrote this because I was getting ready for this video and this message came in very clear, and I just couldn't jump on right now and at that time and tell you about it. So I wrote this down. This is kind of why I decided to do these 3 videos, because it's going to be the kindness examples of the Fellowship of the Ring and then the other parts of the story as well. So each video will hold examples of kindness. I was actually very surprised to point out that there were 23 direct examples of kindness from the elves, far more than any characters in the Lord of the Rings. And what I can attribute that to is that kindness is actually part of the elven wisdom. It is the wisdom that the elves have. And Tolkien was trying to give a message that kindness, for the sheer act of being kind without any kind of intent behind it or motivation to get anything back, is truly a kind of superpower. Kindness is a power, and I believe that it is part of the wisdom of the elves and what makes them such remarkable characters that some people resonate with and are building, I think, a consciousness and awareness towards awakening into their elven souls. And for me, that means to be a kinder person. I take kindness very seriously. I work in a Montessori school right now. And Montessori is a school in which they teach children to be kind. That's one of their major kind of focuses. And child development psychologists always felt that kindness cannot really come into a child's mind without the idea of external rewards for being good. And that kindness is something that kids cannot learn on their own for the sake of kindness. And Montessori, developed by Maria Montessori, who actually developed the teaching method to basically treat children like friends rather than just students, and to make learning a fun, explorative type of experience. And one of the things that she really believed was that children could learn that an act of kindness itself can be the reward, to make someone feel encouraged, supported, and cared for is the reward when you see the effects of making friends, building trust in others, or making somebody happy that maybe wasn't happy at that moment. Modern society teaches at times that kindness backfires. If you are kind to the wrong person, then that's when sometimes people then say, well, I shouldn't have been kind. And there's this type of distrust with each other in which we hold our kindness back because we're in fear that if we demonstrate kindness, that it will just be a slap in the face and that our kindness will not be really reciprocated and it will not be really appreciated. So modern society has kind of taken back the idea of what kindness is. And I have actually personally seen articles where a mom actually demonstrated how an act of kindness can actually lead to a stalker in her student's school. These kinds of experiences in the modern society make kindness seem like maybe an afterthought or something that well, you could be kind, but it's not really required. I believe that J.R.R. Tolkien, with his stories and his character development of the elves, was showing that kindness is actually a true superpower. It's when you're actually giving up your ego and you're being very selfless in that moment, and you're forgetting about your own needs, your own desires, your own wants, and you are simply being a reflection of love, encouragement, support from the universe to another, to give another person a message that they are loved, that they are cared for, that they are special, that they can do anything that they put their mind to, whatever you want to say that you demonstrate your kindness as. So I take kindness very seriously as both a teacher and as a person. I've never really felt that me being kind to others was a bad thing, although I know that many people have been kind and it has not turned out in the best way for them. But what I want to say, and what I have learned in my experience, and if I can pass this down as a pearl of wisdom, is that I would say keep being kind. It is your superpower. It is a power to have no fear and to become invincible in this world. And what I mean by this is that there's a karmic energy exchange when you are kind. If you are kind to the wrong person, it doesn't matter. Because in the end, that energy will be transformed into something new. You will experience that kindness in return. You will meet somebody that will need that kindness demonstrated. So don't hold or kind of reserve your kindness in fear. And the elves did not. And that's why I want to take at least 3 videos to discuss the superpower of kindness of elves. Because I wrote here, the elves are demonstrators of being kind without fear of others, and with no motivation other than to reflect goodness and love from the universe. I believe kindness is a superpower to be able to move past fear of others in an egoless act, in which you embody the universal consciousness within you in order to give others love in that moment of need. Here are 23 times that the elves were kind, and didn't need to be, but they simply were demonstrating the act of kindness for the sake of kindness itself. So number 1, when I first started to see the act of kindness was when Gandalf was talking to Frodo in the story of the Ring and Bilbo. So this video is more about the Fellowship of the Ring book, but I will include some idea about the movie as well. But this is taking it from the book. So if you haven't read the book and you just watched the movie, I highly recommend you get onto Audible or buy the book. You can find it very cheap on eBay now, and read The Fellowship of the Ring. Actually read the story, because there's a lot of things that are missing from the movie that Peter Jackson did not include, which I think that he should have, but I understand that the movie would be way longer if he did. But this is more kindness deeds that are found in the book. So anyway, so Gandalf is talking about the ring to Frodo, because Frodo is asking all these questions in the Shire when Bilbo disappears, and all he has left is the ring, and Gandalf is telling him to keep it safe. Gandalf tells him the story of Gollum, which is different because in the movie we don't see who Gollum really was before until the second movie. But Gandalf actually tells Frodo right off the bat who Gollum was, that he was a river folk named Sméagol, and that Gollum was eventually, he was a creature, well, he was a river folk, very much like a hobbit, that wanted a ring that was found by his best friend. And so the ring was taken by him, and he basically killed his best friend for it. And when he put the ring on, but Tolkien described that he was already kind of a mischievous character as it was, so the ring's kind of power over him made that come out more, made his shadow nature come out more. And he started to do really awful deeds, play tricks on people, and become invisible and trip them and steal things. And he started to get a really bad reputation in the town. And so he had this invisible ring, and he had this power to be invisible while he did all these awful deeds, including the murder of his friend. So Golem is a creature that basically this riverfolk Schmigo became. And Frodo is sitting there in wonder and was like, well, you're telling me that Golem was found by the Mirkwood Elves and taken to Mirkwood prison? I can't understand you. You mean to tell me that you and the elves let Golem live on, who carried out these horrible deeds? At this rate, he is as bad as an orc. He is just an enemy. He deserves death. And Gandalf says, deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die who deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then I would not be so quick to judge. In any case, we did not kill him. He is very old and very wretched. The Wood Elves have him in their Mirkwood prison, but they treat him with such kindness as they can find in their wise hearts. So that's the very first glimpse of the idea of the kindness of elves, including the idea that Sam just really wants to see the elves. And he's very excited to meet the elves because he's heard stories about how they're these beautiful creatures and they're very kind. And if I can just say something right here that I forgot to say, this channel would not exist if the elves were not kind. I am not for trying to promote the idea of using the elves as references because of their external beauty or as their ability to even have magic or to be connected to the fairies. I truly believe that the elves demonstrate the superpower of kindness, that if more humans did, this world would be a very different place. This channel exists because the elves are kind. This channel would not exist if the elves were just beautiful or just were magical creatures. So I just wanted to say that on a personal note, that I think that that is the most important thing to get out of the idea of using the elves as an anchor, as a guide, as a reference, or as an understanding of more of who you are and what your superpower is. If you are a kind person that loves the earth and loves animals and tries to live with a compassionate heart and mind. So that's what I wanted to say on a personal note there. But number 2, so we don't see the elves until actually when Frodo and Gollum, Frodo and Sam, and the other hobbits end up going on the journey with the ring. And they're in the forest on their own. And that's when they start to meet the elves. Because there's a wandering pack of elves led by Gildor from Rivendell. And this translates to the idea of meeting Arwen in the forest. And so Gildor from Rivendell first takes the hobbits with them to keep them safe and lodge with them. They come upon the hobbits all alone, and instead of allowing them to just wander the forest on their own, they say, this road is not safe. This is not a safe journey for you, so we will keep you safe with us, and you can lodge with us, you can hang out with us. Come now with your friends and join our company. You had best walk in the middle so you do not stray. So then another kind act that they do is they surround the hobbits, who are much, much smaller than them. So they're protecting the hobbits. And this is when I pointed out number 3. The elves, even more than hobbits, could walk without sound of footfall. They were very quiet. But Pippin, the youngest hobbit, began to feel sleepy, and he staggered once or twice while walking with the elves. But each time, an elf from his side put out an arm and saved him from a fall. They didn't have to do that. They could simply let the little hobbit fall, but they decided to be kind for the sake of kindness itself, in understanding and in caring about this hobbit that's walking with them. So that was a big demonstration of elven kindness that you start to see. Not only did they invite the hobbits to come with them on their journey, as they were a wandering pack of elves, and they were going to lodge for a while, but then they were heading west. They were actually going to sail away. But before they did, they wanted to include the hobbits. And I got very detailed with this part because I thought that there was a lot of type of kindness that was demonstrated. So number 4 is when this particular time of meeting the elves was a very special date and a time of celebration. Remerith, the Pleiades, and Melevikar, the Orion constellations, they rose high in the sky, and the elves burst into a song together. And when the hobbits saw them, the elves started laughing, and they were inviting the hobbits very merrily and said, "Come now is the time for celebration and speech and merriment, and food in the fire hall for hungry guests." So then they started to include the hobbits, not only on their journey with them and sitting in the lodge that they created an opening in a field in the forest that was basically a created space of where they were going to eat. But they actually invited the hobbits to celebrate with them and to feast with them and to, celebrate this special occasion that you learn about in the Silmarillion of what it means, because Varda created those constellations along with many others in order to symbolize the eventual defeat of Morgoth, or the idea that the darkness will never overcome the light completely. And that's what the stars symbolize, is that darkness is not forever, and that the stars will shine out a light and a brightness and guide their way. So the elves are always celebrating on this special day. And so the elves served cups and food to the hobbit, which I felt was definitely a demonstration of kindness, because here these beings they're more powerful, and they're known to be more powerful. And here they are serving hobbits, pouring drink and serving bread and fruit. And this is when Gildor says, "This is poor fare, for we are lodging in the greenwood, far from home. But if you are ever our guests, there we will treat you better, in Rivendell." And Frodo says, "Well, it seems good enough for a birthday party." Because it's true. I mean, this was bread and fruit and wine or nectar, sweet drinks. And here is kind of this modesty of Gildor coming out saying that this is poor fare for us, but we are doing the best we can because we're not in our normal place and location of home. And I think that right there is demonstrating another type of kindness in which they want to provide the best for others, with no intention behind it other than to provide and entertain their guests. And so it shows that they really give their best effort forward in whatever situation they can. Excuse me, one second, my throat. So they serve them bread and fruit and wine and nectar drinks, like I said, and Frodo thanked the elves as they served them in their Elvish tongue. And they laughed and they smiled and they said, "Well, here is a jewel among hobbits." So they're demonstrating another type of kindness in which there's support and encouragement to the hobbit, to let him know that his study of the Elvish language, the old ancient language, he didn't study much, but he knows a few words from Bilbo, is something that doesn't go unrecognized. And I think that was something that the hobbit needed, a little bit of encouragement to know that his efforts were appreciated, that he was putting forth an effort to thank them in Elvish for their hospitality to the hobbits. And the elf said that this is a jewel among hobbits. Like, this is wonderful. We love to have you. Number 7. So this is another demonstration here in which what happens is he says this to Frodo. You do not ask me or tell me much that concerns yourself, Frodo, but I already know a little. I can read more in your face and the thought behind your questions. You are leaving the Shire, and yet you doubt what you seek. Is that not so? It is, said Frodo. So I said that this was a demonstration that the elves show a type of empathy within them to be able to read the emotions of others and to understand what Frodo is carrying as a burden with him, but he doesn't even have to say. And that alleviates a type of pressure on Frodo to actually talk and, kind of present the ring. And so you see that there's this extreme concern, this focus on Frodo, and looking deeper into him that demonstrates that type of empathy that the elves had. They naturally had that ability to read the emotions of others and read kind of the situation that others were having to deal with, but were not saying. So that, I think, was a demonstration of not only kindness, but empathy there. And this is when he continues and he says, well, has Gandalf not told you about the Black Riders? Because then Frodo asks the elves, this is all while they're still eating with the elves, and he says, well, what about the Black Riders that are chasing me? Because he starts noticing that these creatures in black are basically following the hobbits ever since they left the Shire. And this is when he says, well, if Gandalf has not told you about the Black Riders, then I think that it's not for me to say more, lest terror should keep you from your journey. Meaning that there's a type of kindness that is extended here to Frodo in the idea that he doesn't want to shock him and tell him about the wraiths if he has not been prepared by Gandalf yet. And he said that he doesn't want to tell him exactly what they are because the elves cannot go with them all the way, and they are not going to be there in the morning. This is all just at night when they're talking to them. And so he's saying, well, the idea is that, I don't want to tell you more because I don't want terror and fear to keep you from your journey. And so that's a type of kindness that is extended as well. It's a type of support that he's demonstrating, that he doesn't want to interfere with his quest or his journey. It takes a little bit of a type of way of looking into the future or anticipating the needs of others and understanding where Frodo is on his journey, because he's not yet the really strong, spirited hobbit yet, but he becomes that later on as he goes through this journey. But Gildor is noticing that about him and saying, well, I don't want to tell you this yet. And then he says this, but this is the thing. Elves are not going to give counsel to say, do this or do that. And he says, elves are known not to give counsel in the idea that they will say yes or no, and it will allow you to figure out for yourself. They're not very bossy in that idea. They're not trying to tell people what to do at all, but they're using their source of wisdom to guide others if there needs to be. And this is what he says. But if you demand advice for friendship's sake, I shall give it. And this is what Gildor says to Frodo. So already Frodo is known as a friend. And he says, well, okay, so because you ask for advice and I see you as a friend, an elf friend, then I'm going to give it to you. And that's when he says, take all those with you that are willing to go on this journey with you. You have a long road ahead. And so he keeps on talking to him. And this is number 10 when he says, may Elbereth protect you. and courage is found in unlikely places. Be of good hope, and sleep now. In the morning we will have gone, but we will send our messages throughout the lands. The wandering company shall know of your journey, and those that have power of good shall be on the watch. I name you elf friend, and may the stars shine upon the end of your road. Seldom had we had such delight in strangers, and it is fair to hear words of these ancient speech upon the lips of some other wanderers in the world. So sleep came upon Frodo as he yawned, as Gildor was saying this, and the elf led him to a bough beside Pippin, and it's this bed that is made of branches, and he threw himself in the bed and fell into a dreamless slumber. So there is a lot of kindness there demonstrated for him. First of all, the elf Gildor gives him a blessing and says, "May Elbereth protect you," which is the valor of the stars, which is also known as Varda, and Elbereth is the Quenya name for her. So right there he's saying, well, may the stars guide you and protect you, and may you always find your way. And he says, I'm also going to go even above and beyond that effort of just blessing you, and actually going to send out messages to my kin that are wandering in the forest as well, because they're heading west and they're going to sail away. And I'm going to tell them to watch out for a group of young hobbits and to be on the lookout for them. And of course, this message proves to be very useful. So you could see the hospitality of elves there. The kindness of elves is demonstrated in that particular meeting. And this makes Sam very overjoyed, and he's so excited to be able to finally meet the elves. And he says to Frodo, you know, the elves are a lot like us in the idea of the things that they like and the things that they prioritize, and they're just a little bit different. They're just a little bit more wizened to the world and the ways of the world and to the past, and they can pass that wisdom down in that way. But they're not so much different from the hobbits. And it's really nice to see that, because the elves are not something that Sam feels like are unapproachable creatures any longer. And so you see that kindness of the elves is coming forth, that not only are the elves known as beautiful and magical in a lot of ways and powerful and wise, but they are kind. And so Sam and the hobbits get that message now. So number 11 is, there was no sign of the elves in the morning. But here's where another gift of kindness happens. They have left us food, drink, and bed. And bread. And the bread tastes as good as yesterday. That's what Sam says to Frodo. So they're so excited because they wake up and all the elves are gone from this field and everything's taken down, magically so. The idea of kind of the branches that were serving as a place to feast and kind of the stumps to sit on and everything, all of that was basically gone in the idea of everything that was created to make a bed. All of that was gone. And all that was left was the stumps and just food and bread and all that they needed basically for their journey. So that's another act of kindness that you see demonstrated here. The elves could have just simply left, but they also decided to leave a little gift behind for the hobbits. And so Sam says this, wonderful folk, for they are so old and so young, so sad and so merry, but they're not quite so different from hobbits after all. And then number 12 is when we see this. When it came time to make their own meal, after they started to walk towards basically go meet Gandalf at the Pony Inn, they end up realizing that the elves had filled their bottles with a clear drink, pale golden in color, and it had a scent of honey made of flowers and was wonderfully refreshing for them, and it gave them energy to keep going. So right there, you see the elves even went beyond that. They didn't just leave bread, food, and drink just sitting there for them. They also filled their vials that they kept in their packs. I mean, they're just incredible because they anticipate the needs of the hobbits. Think about if people treated each other like that. I mean, I try to do that, and sometimes it's hard to anticipate the needs, but I think that that's really important, is that we look at one another in that way, and we try to anticipate each other's needs. What is it that that person needs without them saying? And it could simply just happen by simple observation. The elves just had a keener sense of observation within them, that they were able to go through the packs of the hobbits or look and see what the hobbits packed and understand that they maybe didn't have enough, or they didn't have maybe the supplies that would energize them and keep them going on this journey. So it's really just about having more of an awareness and an observation, and that's how you can demonstrate this act of kindness in anticipating the needs of others in the way that the elves did. Number 13. So this is really where you start to see where the message that the other elves were sending to basically tell the others that, well, Gildor was telling them that the hobbits were on their way, or they were wandering, and to keep out for them. So this is why Glorfindel then meets with them, and this is the part actually when Arwen, sorry about that. This is when in the movie we see Arwen coming forward, because Glorfindel comes upon the hobbits when they are already stabbed, when Frodo is already stabbed by the wraiths. And so Glorfindel meets up with the hobbits and Aragorn, and this is after they met up with Aragorn at the inn, basically. And so they're on their way to Rivendell, and Glorfindel meets them along the way. And it turns out that he was actually actively seeking them out, kind of like what Arwen was possibly doing in the movie, but they didn't really show that. But Glorfindel was the elf from Rivendell that was sent to actively seek them out. And he says this, "Hail and well met at last," because Aragorn, he recognizes that he's an elf, and he says, "My Gavanin," and he meets with him. And Glorfindel says, "Yes, well met at last. I was sent from Rivendell to look for you. We feared that you were in danger upon the road." Elrond received news that troubled him. He received a message that the 9 wraiths were abroad, and you were astray, bearing a great burden, without guidance, and Gandalf had not returned. So then Glorfindel says that he left a token that Aragorn actually found beforehand by a bridge in muddy waters, and it was a barrel, which could either be an emerald or an aquamarine, which is what beryl crystal actually is. And he left a beryl stone for him as kind of like a message that maybe hopefully Aragorn as a tracker would find. And I'm sure that Glorfindel knew Aragorn had great skills as a tracker, and that he would eventually find the stone and know that help was on its way. So right there, you see that Glorfindel went out of his way. Here he is. He doesn't know who this company is at all, but he goes out of his way to leave a little token and let them know that help is on the way and that he's heading over there now. So Glorfindel meets with them, and number 14 is an act of kindness here, where Glorfindel says, "Alas, the wounds of this weapon are beyond my skill to heal," because he's looking at Frodo's wound from the wraiths. But he says, "I will do what I can until you get to Rivendell." So that's the part of Arwen in the movie. So Glorfindel tries his best to heal it, and he does a good job, because here it says this. Glorfindel performs a type of Reiki on Frodo. And so it says this exact here. He searched the wound on Frodo's shoulder with his fingers, and his face grew grave, as if what he learned disquieted him. But Frodo felt the chill lessen. In his side and arm, a little warmth crept down from his shoulder to his hand, and the pain grew easier, and he was able to move his arm. Then Glorfindel allows Frodo to ride his horse and drink a sparkly water that gave him energy. So there you see even more kindness demonstrated. Not only was Glorfindel trying to heal him, but then he also gave him his elven horse to take him to Rivendell in search of more healing from Elrond than what he could do, and also to ride faster than the wraiths and get him there, which is what you see that part in the movie when Arwen is taking Frodo with her. So that's the difference between the movie and the book. In the book, it's just Frodo on the horse himself, and Glorfindel's kind of following along on foot, and the others are trying to catch up to him. And so that's kind of the difference there, but you do see that there is a type of healing that Glorfindel does for him, and he also gives him a type of energy drink in order to help him as well to make it past the Brunnen, which is the river that is basically connecting them to Rivendell. And so he goes above and beyond and does that for him. And then number 16, because that was 15, number 16 is when he finally gets to Rivendell, we learn that Elrond was actually housed for 4 nights and 3 days, tended by Elrond for all those times, and healed him and removed a splinter from the knife. Now, not completely healed him, but he did do a lot more than what Glorfindel did, and he was also able to remove the splinter from the knife that was trying to basically change him and transform him. So he did heal him in that regards, physically. Now, I ran out of room on there, and so I wanted to keep going on my phone here, my notes. So number 17 is when we learned that not only was Elrond trying to heal Frodo, and he did succeed in that, and that the hobbits were basically kept as hospitable guests in Rivendell to relax and rest. And Rivendell is a place where Elrond told them to, have no more worries. You are safe here, and to enjoy your rest in Rivendell for as long as you'd like. And then Elrond starts to join a council together to talk about the matter of the ring and understanding what, Frodo was carrying. And so Gandalf basically is there now, and he's meeting Frodo. And they're in the council, and this is where you see another type of kindness that's demonstrated by the elves. So number 17 is when you start to see more of this idea where Gandalf was telling Frodo in the very beginning that Gollum escaped the Mirkwood prison because the elves were, they were not, he didn't say he escaped yet, but that Gollum was in the Mirkwood prison and that he was being cared for and being looked after in the best way that he could with their wise hearts. And then Legolas, we find, went to the council meeting in order to give the news that Gollum escaped. And this is what he said. Legolas said that Gollum has escaped, not for a lack of watchfulness, but over kindliness. That was his exact quote. And we fear the prisoner had aid from others. We guarded this creature day and night, to Gandalf's bidding. Much we have wearied of the task. But Gandalf had hoped for his cure, and we had not the heart to keep him in dungeons forever under the earth, where he would fall back into his own black thoughts. In the days of fair weather, we led Gollum through the woods, and there was a high tree standing alone that he liked to climb. Often we let him mount up to the highest branches, till he felt the free wind, but we set a guard at the tree's foot. And one day he refused to come down, and the guards had no mind to climb after him. He had learned the trick of clinging to branches, with his feet as well as hands. So they sat by the tree far into the night. It was that very night of summer, yet moonless and starless, that orcs came on us unawares. We drove them off after some time, but there were many and fierce. But they came from over the mountains and were unused to the woods. When the battle was over, we found that Gollum was gone and his guards were slain or taken. It then seemed plain to us that the attack had been for his rescue, and he knew of it beforehand. How that was contrived, we cannot guess. But Gollum is cunning, and the spies of the enemy are many. So that's what Legolas says at the council, is that, well, we have news. Gollum did escape, but it's not because we were not watching him. It was because maybe we were being too kind. And so you see that there's kindness in elves, even in the most fiercest of situations in which they're being guards over prisoners. And I've made this point in another video, the idea that, prisoners are not treated that way in this world. And in a lot of ways, that's what's wrong with our whole system of justice. In the idea that, prisoners themselves, even though they did not act kind in their acts of crime, the guards and the ones that are in charge of the prisons should not act unkind either, because just the idea of sitting there and being isolated from society should be basically punishment enough. But we have prison systems which is so terrible, and it's something that I've really kept watch on over the last few years, in which prisoners themselves are sexually molested, raped, abused, and prison guards either do it themselves or they look the other way. It's very different from the type of guards that are in this story. And you can argue that this is just a fairy tale, but I believe that there's a potential there that is letting us know, and this was a very wise idea here, saying that we had not the heart to keep him in dungeons forever under the earth and just treat him, terribly and just give him food through a little crack where he would fall back into his own black thoughts. They felt that Gollum could still be rehabilitated and healed eventually. And that's something that we're missing in our prison system. We don't have that type of thought where we actually look at the criminal as another human, another soul that has lost their way, and that when you treat them just as badly as they have treated others, they never find their way back. They're lost in their dark thoughts about the earth and about the world. I can go on and on about this subject. And I talked about it in a video that I titled, I think it was The Future of Prisons, because I really do believe in a evolution of our justice system, and our prison system really needs to happen in order to really make a difference in our society. But right there, you see that the elves have the answer in the idea that they know how to treat their prisoners. And even though they were being overly kind, and Gollum really took advantage of that, it's still something that I can still appreciate as a reader, and I can appreciate as somebody else who's in this world looking for other acts of kindness demonstrated. So I thought that was really important that Legolas was there at the council meeting to tell them and to give them that news. That's why he was there. That's really the only reason why. But then he ended up coming along on the fellowship, or being part of the fellowship. So number 18 is when, in the book, when Sam snuck into the council meeting of the Ring, and he spoke up at last about Frodo going, Elrond then kind of rewarded him with his bravery, or perceived his spirit of courage, which was needed for Frodo in the distance and on in the journey. Elrond that day put his trust in the courage of hobbits. So I think that that was an act of kindness as well, because he could have said, no, absolutely not, Sam. And, even though Sam really wanted to go with Frodo because that was his his master and his friend, Elrond then took his chance to say, well, then I'm going to put my trust in hobbits this day. And he kind of allowed Sam to live out his experience of bravery, which is another type of kindness in which when you don't inhibit others from what they really want to do, that is a kindness that's demonstrated in just your ability to allow that to happen. There's a new type of parenting that's going on, and also teaching as well, in which you don't try to inhibit the child's exploration of themselves, but you try to encourage them and support them in their choices, basically. And I think that was important because you see that in Elrond's actions there, that he's not trying to hinder Sam's also his self-expression of bravery or just simply being a good friend. Number 19 happens when Legolas, so this is when what happens is when basically they go to Moria. Now the Fellowship is called together. They're called together, then they go to Moria. They're walking through and they lose Gandalf and they're trudging through everything. And so this is when you see that Legolas not only tried to go find where the sun was, because it was hard for them to keep warm because they were on a path that was away from the sunlight. And so Legolas said, well, I go to find the sun for the hobbits, because the hobbits were like freezing and they were much smaller. And so he had some concern for them. So he ran up ahead to find a path of sunlight to keep the hobbits warm, because at this time of their journey, the Fellowship was actually experiencing winter. And so you see that, and they're getting cold. And so Legolas happens to find a path of sunlight for them to walk. So he finds an easier path for them where they do get some sunlight and heat. And also what happens is Legolas is the only one to notice Frodo and Sam fell behind. And he told Aragorn, and Aragorn apologizes, and he tells them that he will help him as best as he can with the elven plant Athelas. So this is after Moria, when we lose Gandalf, and basically they have already met with the orcs in Moria that were in the dwarven caves. And so Legolas also demonstrates that kindness because he takes a compassionate nature in the Fellowship of looking back and looking out for the hobbits in a way that Aragorn kind of forgets. It even says that Aragorn kind of forgets. He's like, I apologize. I just had my mind on other things. So it shows that elves have this ability to have many thoughts in their mind at the same time and never yet forget about those around them that are in need. That's a type of superpower that the elves demonstrate. And it does take work, because you have to kind of focus on others and you have to be aware of others even when they're not in view. And that's what Legolas was able to do. So he was a very important part of the Fellowship because he had that type of insight to be able to do that. And his senses were very attuned to the needs of others, like basically all the elves really represent. But that is number 19 there. And number 20 happens when the Lothlórien elves, after they finally get to Lothlórien, when the Lothlórien elves, after some kind of chat between Legolas and them, and deciding that, Legolas was a kin, and they took a look at the hobbits, the Lothlórien elves that were guards, that were basically in the Lothlórien forest to protect the Lothlórien forest. And they said, the hobbits do not look evil, and so they are allowed to pass to seek guidance from Galadriel. And when they basically invited them to go on top of this flat that was in the trees, is basically a lookout point where the guards were sitting. They were given fur cloaks, food, and drink from the Elven guards. So right there, you see, there's another type of hospitality that's not just from the Rivendell elves, but it's also of the Lothlórien elves. That here they are, they're trying to help them as well. So they give them also what they need, because it was cold in the Lothlórien woods. So they gave them the fur cloaks to keep them warm, and also the lembas bread and a drink to energize them. And they also said to the hobbits that they do not look evil. And I think that that right there was an act of kindness, because it was kind of paying a compliment to the hobbits, that they looked a certain way that would be approved by the elves of Lothlórien. And so what happens is, in Lothlórien forest, Galadriel and Celeborn, they get word that the Fellowship is traveling in the forest. So they send messages basically to the Elven guards that are walking through the forest with them, with their leader Haldir. And Haldir gets a message, and he says that Galadriel and Celeborn are allowing all of you now to walk freely, because before they had to be blindfolded because the dwarf Gimli was with them, and the elves and the dwarves, they have a history. And so there you see Galadriel Celeborn finally allowed the dwarf to be unblinded, and he could walk through Lothlórien forest, and everyone to walk freely as they heard of their fellowship and the messages that traveled across the land. So there was this act of kindness coming forward in that way. Number 21, when the fellowship met Celeborn and Galadriel finally, when they get to the elven city of Lothlórien, Celeborn welcomes the dwarf Gimli and says, "May this meeting be a sign that better days are at hand," meaning to put to rest the feud between the dwarves and the elves. Because a long time ago, the dwarves killed an elven king named Thingol, and that caused a bad blood feud between the dwarves and the elves. They never really had an outward war with each other, but they simply didn't like each other, or they were wary and being very cautious of one another. And so this is when Celeborn extends that graciousness towards Gimli and says, "Well, we've never had a dwarf in this forest, so may this be a sign that we shall have more, or that eventually now the dwarves and the elves can be friends." Number 22 is when Galadriel smiles at Gimli when he seems sad. And he was basically I think he was blaming himself at that moment, and it pierced his heart as he looked into the face of an old enemy, and he saw love and understanding coming from Galadriel's face. And then Celeborn asked for Gimli's forgiveness at him, at first speaking harshly to him, saying that it was his fault about Gandalf dying, saying that it was kind of an ill omen to have a dwarf in the fellowship, and that he felt that when Gandalf was, because they think at that point that Gandalf is gone, that's when Celeborn, at first, he was kind of saying, well, it might have to do with this dwarf. But then he asks for Gimli's forgiveness. And he says, "Please forgive me at first for speaking harshly," and said he will now do what he can to aid the fellowship. He actually admits, and I forgot to write exactly what he said here, but he actually admits at this point that he was only speaking harshly to him because he was upset at the news of Gandalf, because Gandalf was an old friend of the elves. So that's a type of kindness that's demonstrated, in which he's humble enough to know when he was wrong, that he was wrong for blaming Gimli and for speaking really angrily towards him at first. And he's also able to admit that his emotions, his outburst of emotions, basically came from being upset at the news of Gandalf. That is a type of kindness that sometimes humans forget to do with one another, because a lot of times we're very reactionary towards others, and it's only an afterthought in which it takes maybe days for sometimes people to come around. But this was almost instant for Celeborn to say to Gimli. He immediately recognized, well, wait a minute, that's why, because Galadriel basically corrects him, and he immediately was able to recognize, well, that's why I was so harsh, is because I was very sad by the news. And this immediately starts to build more trust between the dwarves and the elves. And this is when Galadriel says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled, for tonight you will sleep in peace. You shall have refuge in the city and not go till that you are all healed and rested." This is what Celeborn said. So once again, he's extending hospitality in Lothlórien for this fellowship. And there is that kindness that's demonstrated to put their heart and their mind at rest, that they've had this terrible experience of losing Gandalf and Moria. And so this is a time now of rest and to heal from their past pain and hurt. And then number 23 is when we see another act of kindness that was not necessary, but it was just part of the Elven way, that Galadriel gave gifts to the Fellowship. And you do see gifts being given in the movie, but they're far more detailed in the book, so I want to go through them here. So with Aragorn, she gave him a Lothlórien magical sheath for protection of any sword, so that it may not break once inside, so that the sword, the Anduril, will not be able to be broken when it is actually mended together, and he's able to use it. And the Alesser, the elf stone, which was an emerald gem set in a silver eagle brooch, left for him by Arwen a long time ago. So then she ends up giving him these two gifts, and in the movie, he receives only an elvish curved hunting knife. So in the book, the gifts are far more elaborate, and they go into more of a detail. And I think that the movie kind of missed that opportunity, because those gifts are very special in pointing out kind of the overextended effort of the elves to help them on this journey. Because having a sword that never breaks is something, I think it's a magical, powerful weapon. And so this is what she anticipated that he needed. And Boromir, she gave him a solid gold Lothlórien belt shaped as linked leaves. And for Merry, Brandy Buck, and Peregrine Took, she gave a silver belt with gold flower clasp, and it's a belt that's favored by the elves of Lothlórien. And in the movie, they just get the daggers. So they actually got belts in the book, which I think was a nice touch, because it was showing that this was a favorite of the elves and that they wanted to give them to the hobbits. So it's not a gift that the elves wouldn't take themselves. And that's something very important. You should never give a gift to another person that you don't want yourself. And so this is demonstrated that the elves really love this belt. It's a favorite of theirs, so they want to give it to the hobbits as well. And then for Sam, it was a box of earth from Galadriel's orchard and Malorn seed. These were contained in a small gray wooden box with a silver G rune on it. She tells him to sprinkle this and plant trees in the Shire to remember the elven realm of Lothlórien. In the movie, he receives rope, but in the book, this was a second gift from one of the elves of Lothlórien, because the rope was also given to Sam too by one of the elven guards as just kind of just a generosity that was extended towards him, to give him this silver Lothlórien rope that is said that it can easily come undone as much as you knot it. If you just tug it a little bit, it comes undone, and it's very strong and cannot be broken. So he got all those gifts, and Legolas then gets Lothlórien bow, a stronger and lighter bow than Mirkwood's, and strung with elf hair from the Lothlórien elves. And Frodo, the light of Arendiel, a small crystal vial with the light of Erendiel's star that reflected in the water of Galadriel's fountain. This was ultimately the light of the two trees that was actually preserved in the Silmaril jewel that is talked about in the Silmarillion book, because those jewels have a very, very important part of why Morgoth starts his kind of act of revenge against the elves. And then later on, that's what brings the Dark Lord Sauron into power and things like that. So it's kind of important to read the Silmaril if you want to understand more about the light of Erendiel and where that came from. But here I will give you just a little bit. It just says, this was ultimately the light of the two trees as preserved in the Silmaril jewels created in the First Age. Erendiel was the half-elven mortal who was the father of Elrond and Elros, guided by the light of Venus, which is what you find out that the light of Erendiel, the star, is actually Venus. It's a planet, but to the elves it was a star because it's in the sky just as bright as a star. When he was sailing to Valinor to ask for the help from the Valar to stop Morgoth in the First Age, the light symbolizes hope and has the power to bring darkness into light, and later helped Frodo defeat the giant spider Shelob so he could make his way to Mordor. So there was a type of anticipation on Galadriel's side with this gift, knowing that he was going to enter Mordor, he was going to go on this journey that would take him into realms of darkness, and that he needed light to help guide his way and to keep him focused on, basically his goal, and to give him support and encouragement along the way. I think that was an ultimate act of kindness from her too, because this was a very special vial that has been kept in the Elven bloodline for a very long time. For her to hand it over to a hobbit, I mean, that's an act of kindness that sometimes humans don't demonstrate, is giving up something that's very important to themselves for the love of another. And then for Gimli, she asked Gimli what he wanted, because she had no idea what a dwarf wanted. And he said, only a piece of your hair. And she smiled and replied, well, first tell me, what are you going to do with this piece of my hair? And he said, I promise to set it in a crystal back in the dwarven cave to represent a truce between elves and dwarves. And she smiled and replied, hear me, all elves. Let none say all dwarves are grasping and ungracious. When all he asked for was a piece of her golden hair. So dwarves are known to be greedy in Tolkien's story. And, well, they were, because they killed Thingol, the Elven king, for the jewels, the Silmarils, and these other types of jewels that he had. And they ended up slaying him. And so this started a reputation of the dwarves that they were really selfish, greedy creatures. And here she says, well, hear me now, in the Third Age, that is no longer true, that here is a dwarf that can have anything they want, gold, silver, anything they want, anything beautiful, elven gems, does not matter. All he wants was a piece of her hair. And she demonstrates that kindness by giving that to him, knowing that it would make him happy. And so this is all that you see in the first book, but I think it's a lot. And then I'm going to do another video that's going to talk about the other acts of kindness in each of the books. And yeah, I will take some questions or comments. I know this is a very deep and, kind of a deeper look at kindness, but I feel like kindness is never just demonstrated in one way, but it's demonstrated in a lot of different ways. And I thought that the elves really show that very well. So I'm happy that you guys all jumped on. I like that. Tila Thurston, kindness begins at home. It does. I believe kindness does begin at home. However, I will say that even if you do not grow up in a childhood that demonstrates kindness, such as, your family maybe doesn't take kindness very seriously, I still believe that you can learn how to become a kinder person, either through school or through the people that you hang around, hang around and surround yourself with. But it does begin at home. Every parent should remember that if they want their child to be kind to others, then they need to be an example of that for sure. And then Siren of the Void. Everyone is to be treated as a friend. She is right. Yes. I think that the elves are they're very good at doing that. If you're an enemy to the elves, they're going to treat you like an enemy. But if you are a friend or someone that they feel they can help or teach or guide, such as Gollum, they felt that they could teach or they could heal, maybe, possibly, that's when they did not treat him so much like an enemy, but rather a prisoner that was under rehabilitation. But if you are an enemy to the elves, they will treat you such. But if you are not, then they're going to treat you with kindness. And I think that that's really important. I mean, you don't have to be a pushover in the idea that you are going to treat those who are unkind to you as well as, with kindness without defense. There should be some kind of defense, but you can also, the phrase, kill them with kindness. I mean, if somebody is being unkind to you, you really can kind of stop the fight and the battle with someone by just being kind and killing them with kindness. Kindness is something that it can stop fights, and it really has a great power behind it. Kindness is strength. It is. And I think kindness is love. I think kindness has a lot of power behind it, a lot more than what people are, I guess, focusing on today. Right. Jade Parker. I'm afraid to sometimes appear distant to other people because my shyness gets in the way. I try to learn to express kindness from a more open place, if that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, because it's true. Like, if you're a shy person and if someone is like in your life and you're shy and you're not the first to make the move, then it could be hard to demonstrate that kindness. But I think, like, I'm an introvert. I'll give you an example. I may not be the first one at the party to make conversation with somebody. Sometimes it can be hard, and I like to kind of just sit and observe, and then I like to maybe make conversation with maybe one person if they start talking to me. But if I see somebody like needs the door open for them, or they need something, I don't even have to have a conversation with them. I'll just simply help them. And I think that that's where a shy person can be kind. It doesn't have to even be an act demonstrated through words. Although the elves are very wordy, in Tolkien's story, they're known to be those that are never short of words. And the Elven language is something that they developed as a part of themselves. And it's very important. His language is very important for elves. And so a lot of their kindness is demonstrated in the way that they talk to others that they decide are elf friends. But kindness is demonstrated without words. And I do that all the time because I'm not a very vocal person to people that I don't know. I feel like I can talk to you all because I feel like I built this community on my channel. And there's some part of me that doesn't really care about, if I don't know people, because I'm on YouTube to discuss important topics and messages. So I think that that's why I don't really appear shy here, but I'm the same way, Jade. And I know what you mean. I mean, it doesn't have to be something that you're always talking about, but it's more about like what you do to anticipate the needs of others. I think that is the true power of kindness, and it comes through the power of observation, alertness of others, compassion, empathy, understanding what others need without them even saying something sometimes. Okay, so Morwin says, in the Hobbit movie, I feel it made the elves of Mirkwood seem pretty unkind and haughty, and Thranduil most of all. I think the movie demonstrated, I don't feel that they were demonstrated unkindly, or that they seemed like unkind beings, but there was a sort of type of untouchableness or kind of a haughtiness. But I think that they did bring that out really well in the idea of how they treated, well, not the orcs, but how they treated the dwarves. Like, they did allow the dwarves to kind of come to Thranduil and talk to him, but the dwarves were trying to keep their mission secret because they didn't want to share knowledge that the dragon, was sleeping, and that they could sneak in and take the jewels. So I think that there was a point in which Thranduil sensed that, and so that's why he was being unkind to them. So it was kind of a reflection of the dwarves' unkindness back, if that makes sense. Elves will not act unkind to others unless there's this unkindness kind of reciprocated, but I don't think that they showed how kind the elves really were in the movie versus the book. I think you're definitely right on that, because we completely missed the idea of Gollum's escape and why he escaped. So I think you're right on that for sure. And then Morwen says, from what I remember, he helped the people of the lake town as soon as he heard Smaug destroyed their homes. A very kind and generous act. Exactly, Morwen. Thranduil was known in the book to be a very kind and generous king of Mirkwood Forest, even by the people of Lake Town, because he did help them. And so in the book, you see that more so than in the movie, but I think Lee Pace did a good job of portraying that he was a little bit colder than the book's Thranduil, but he also did have, I think, there was some kind of, I guess, like a crack in his exterior. And I mean, I think that's why Lee Pace was playing it like that. But I think you bring up a very good point between the portrayal of the elves in the movie versus how Tolkien actually wrote them. And then Jade, I have sometimes an issue to trust people, and I feel just often out of place, so I sometimes look kind of aloof. And I mean, you're not alone in that. I think a lot of people really do not trust other people. And so that's why society is not a place of where people are kind to each other kind of religiously or in a natural way. But that kindness comes out as kind of like, I guess, like maybe a rare occasion at times. And so with the elves, you see that it's actually part of their makeup. It's who they are as beings. And I believe that humans have that potential. They have that ability within them. And it really does come to the point of not fearing one another and trusting each other more, to be able to demonstrate that type of that trust in each other and to bring that kindness to surface more. So you're not the only one at all. Siren of the Void, Gildor only appears in the movies at the very end, right? I think it was Glorfindel, but yeah, he's not in neither Gildor or Glorfindel are really part of the movie as much as in the book. Oh, Morwen, I like that the elves seem to give heartfelt compliments so freely. That's something I'm always trying to remember to do because I know how good it feels. Exactly. Yes, they do. And you know how you are able to do that? What I have discovered is that it's about confidence. The elves are at a place of self-confidence in which they know themselves, and they can give compliments freely to others because it's not a threat to who they are. And if you are someone that doesn't believe in yourself and you say you're harboring some kind of feelings about yourself that you don't feel are so good, it's harder for you to give compliments to others because it's like a mirror to you of what you are not. So subconsciously you hold back complimenting from others, but the more and more self-confidence that you gain within yourself to recognize that you are a good person or that you have these good traits to you, and that you're confident in giving away a sense of power, an idea of where you can give other people encouragement and support and compliments freely without any kind of fear that it's going to somehow take away from your own light or focus on yourself. It's really a matter of just not being so concerned about yourself and really having a selfless kind of act to giving to others. So you're absolutely right on that. And then more when the elves being hesitant to give advice because who knows what might result from that advice ties in with not giving people unsolicited advice. It's always been considered rude. Oh, yes. Or when, yes. We have this very bad habit in society in which when people say something to express, a lot of times they are just kind of expressing themselves. And sometimes people want to rush in with advice. But that very act of giving advice, it triggers the person because then they're focusing more on the problem. And if a person is not really looking or seeking for advice and is more just expressing, kind of working out their emotions at that time, and they're not ready for advice. They're not looking for that at all. They're just kind of processing their emotions. Then that advice comes as an insult, because it's like they weren't ready for that advice. They weren't looking for advice. And it's almost like a mirror to them to think like they have a problem. And they weren't ready to admit that they had a problem. They were just ready to admit that they don't feel good, that they're sad, that they're unhappy, that they're angry, that there's something going on with them, and they're expressing that. That's why the elves do not give advice, because they don't want to insult others in that way and shock them and kind of give them wisdom or words or things like that that they're not ready for. And they're also understanding that not even the wise can see the end. That sometimes I have this problem with psychics. If you have a reading with me, and if I do a reading for you, or I just have this thing where I don't tell people their future. I think it's really important for psychics to not tell people exact futures, because I believe that that's actually I believe that it's not as loving, in the idea that it's not allowing somebody to create their own future and decide. Now, you can give hints towards certain pathways that can happen. If you go down a particular, pathway, some people can see the future in what can occur. But I think it's dangerous when psychics tell the future to people in a very definite way, that this is what's going to happen to you, and this is here. So I think that does not happen with the elves. The elves are type of psychics that do not give the future advice, or they don't tell exactly what's going to happen to them, because in many ways people are not ready to hear it, and it does do something to the other person. So yes, I totally agree with you, more when we really need to be more considerate about when to give advice, when to not. And the way I've learned is that when people are saying, I need help, what kind of advice can you give? That's when I give advice. It's very much like when Gildor said that if someone demands advice, well, then for friendship's sake, then I'll give it. But if they're not asking for advice and they're simply saying, I'm sad today, or I have this opinion about what's going on and things like that, just let them vent. Just be maybe an ear for them, because that's honestly all they're asking for at that point. So it really is about just anticipating their needs. Claire 22. So always walk with caution then? No, I think it's the opposite. I think that you don't have to have caution of others. I think that you completely are kind to everyone you possibly can meet, And if it doesn't work out and if it's a slap in your face, then that's because of that person. It has nothing to do with you. And I think that you demonstrating that as kind of your superpower will bring about more things into your life, because there'll be kind of this natural kind of attraction to bringing better things into your life. The kinder you are to others, the more kindness you receive back from others. You might receive people being unkind to you, and that's fine, but if you could just get over that and say, well, that's them. It has nothing to do with me, and it's not like I'm going to put away my kind nature now because that person just didn't receive it in the way that I intended. So no, it's not about walking with caution at all. It's about having no fear. The elves have no fear. The only thing they're cautious about is kind of just with their wisdom of understanding Morgoth and how the Dark Army starts to spread, darkness around Arda. That's really the only thing that they're really cautious about, and things that Elrond kind of cautions about in the council meeting. But truly, it's not about having caution. It's actually throwing caution to the wind and just being kind regardless. And then there's a big difference between being kind and not having boundaries. Yes. I mean, you have boundaries. The elves have boundaries. They don't let anybody into Rivendell and Lothlórien with bad intentions. But those that seek for them and are elf friends, then they are kind to, and everybody in your life that walks into your life, whether they need something, whether they just want to be a friend, or whether you just meet them as an acquaintance, you should be kind to them. That should be your first act towards them. And if it's not received well, then, like I said, just ignore it. Okay, fine. That's not received by them. But what happens to people is that I think that children, they learn to be kind. A lot of people learn to be kind as children. And kindness, I think, comes out naturally as children at times. And then what ends up happening is that as you grow up, you start learning, well, I was kind to this person and look what it got me. It got me nowhere. And that's your ego saying that this is what this life is about. And so you have to remind yourself of the bigger picture there and say, well, if I'm kind to others, then that's really all that matters. And it doesn't really matter what other people think coming from that kindness. But at the same time, you do need to have boundaries for yourself too. So there's this balance. Don't be a pushover and let people walk all over you and not allow that life that you want, but also be kind to everyone that you meet. I love that quote. Be kind to everybody you meet, for everyone is fighting a battle that you don't know about. And that's when we see Celeborn. He had this outburst towards Gimli, and he kind of blamed him a little bit, but then he realized, well, it's because I'm sad about Gandalf. I'm crushed from this news. And so and if Gimli was, I guess, equally rude back to him, then that example would come into play where Gimli, if Celeborn did not say openly that he was upset about that news of Gandalf, then Gimli would have said something rude back to him. And it would be Gimli's unawareness that Celeborn was dealing with that news inside of him. So be kind to everybody. You don't know what they are going through. And a lot of times people are mean and angry and insulting and all that. I would say the majority of the time, they are acting that way towards you because they are dealing with something. They are going through something. Being kind has a type of power of transformation for a person. It can actually remind a person that life is not so bad. And it can remind a person of love and encouragement coming from a total stranger, coming from the universe. I mean, it's very powerful. Okay, yes, I want to be nurturing like them. Yeah, I think that is a word that can be describing the elves, nurturing, exactly. And that makes a lot of sense because they were the wiser beings of Middle Earth. And what do you do with that wisdom? You nurture others because you know what you go through, so you want to nurture others. I think that that's the nurturing hospitality kind of character of them. You see it a little bit in the movie, but it's far more detailed in the book. I mean, that was only book 1. So hopefully there'll be more examples in book 2. I know there are. And then book 3 as well. So I think, yeah, I really think, oh, here it is. Claire 22, could it be Gollum is not used to kindness? Well, all we know from Tolkien is that in the very beginning when he was Sméagol, that he was already he had already kind of that mischievous nature to him. And he was also very selfish and greedy. And that was why he killed his friend for the ring in the first place. So that's what we know about from Tolkien about Sméagol, who later on became Gollum. But I would say that maybe Sméagol had a type of upbringing that did not treat him with kindness, so that he never really learned that. So I think that you have a great point. I mean, we don't know. Tolkien doesn't really go into that as much because we only get the history in the book from Gandalf giving the story to Frodo. So let's see. No, Mormon, I don't think it's wrong to keep people in prisons either. But it's the way that prisoners are treated in prisons that actually keep them in a very dark place. And that is something that needs to be changed. Absolutely not. I don't think that that criminals should be freed, because I don't think that we can trust them at this point to change their behavior. A lot of criminals are actually really sick, are very, very far repressed emotions, so much so that they don't want to look at their pain and their hurt that they experienced. So we can't trust that they're going to make the right decisions because they're not self-aware enough to do that. So isolation is the best, but it should be about rehabilitation and healing rather than what is going on in prisons today. There is this horrible video about a prisoner that she was a female prisoner, and I think she was in jail for fraud or something. Yeah, I think it was fraud. And she was allowed to have a baby on her own in her cell room. And she went through labor for like 18 hours or something like that on her own. I don't know if you can imagine the pain of that. But I think there's a lawsuit against it, and I think that it became a really big thing. I saw the video about a month ago, and I didn't want to talk about it because it's so negative, but that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, is when prisoners are treated like they're not even human, but they very much are human. They just made their mistakes, and they were not in a place of awareness when they made their choices. And then Shengir, you said, you are absolutely right, and High Elven act of kindness means ascension. I think so. I think kindness is a superpower. I really do. I think that it's part of the Elven wisdom that the elves had. And honestly, that's the only reason why I made this channel, is because I feel like that's a really big part of the elves as far as being inspirational, is being kind, because this world needs more kindness demonstrated. And I'm not saying that it's an unkind world, but I believe that society is a little sick in the idea of where we have kind of lost our connection to one another, but we're getting that back, and it's exciting to see, because I think the internet has kind of pulled us back together in this way. But for many, many years, everybody kind of forgot about how to connect to each other. And we're finding that again through the internet, and also through just kind of our consciousness expanding and being able to have really deep conversations with people offline. I went to a wedding and I was able to have a really nice in-depth conversation with a total stranger. And so I think we are getting to that ability within humanity for sure. But what next needs to happen is more of this trust in each other, trust in the process of the consciousness awakening going on, and demonstrating that kindness that the elves did easily in Lord of the Rings. And I think if everybody kind of did that, I mean, we would have for sure a different type of world in many, many ways. I think kindness has such a very big power. But I have seen some people argue against kindness, actually really vocally say that kindness can bring trouble to you. It's not kindness. It's unawareness and unalertness that can bring trouble. You have to use your intuition. You have to use your eyes. You have to use all your sensory skills in order to see when should you demonstrate kindness and when should you turn away and walk away and run. Because that is the problem. It's not about what you're doing as a kind act, which is the problem. That's never the problem. The problem is, are you aware enough and are you alert enough to know who to be kind to in that situation or not? What are you doing that's kind? Okay, so let's take Ted Bundy. Terrible example, right? But it's actually good and it means something here. Ted Bundy was able to get women in his car because he was able to fake that he was a cripple standing by his van, and he was asking people to asking women at a mall to basically help him put packages in his van, and then that's when he would trap them. But there's something about that situation that maybe the women could be more alert and aware of. I don't think that you have to go out of your way and help total strangers in a type of very vulnerable situation in which you can be placed into a windowless van in the back seat. He's got his trunk opened and he's basically trying to push women into his van. I think there's some things that can go off in your mind and be like, no, I'm not going to really go around this person. But you can still be kind. You can say, I'm sorry, I wish I could help you today, but I just can't. But I think that there's other ways of being kind. And it's not about being foolish or being unaware of your environment. Let's just say that. And that's something I don't know if I can teach or really talk about really clearly, but you just have to be able to use your intuition better. And you have to understand when it is a good time to be vulnerable with a person and when is it not. I don't think kindness has to be necessarily about vulnerability, but it's more about confidence and strength. And I think that there's a difference there in how we look at kindness. Kindness is not about being, exposing your belly and being vulnerable to anyone taking advantage of you. It's about being full in your strength and in your confidence, being able to be kind to others, but also, like someone said, the boundaries are really important. Yeah. Yes, Morwen, the Ted Bundy situation, perfect example of kindness without boundaries. You can help someone, but not to a point where you're putting yourself in needless danger. Exactly. Yeah, that's very, very true. And I think that situation definitely is something that when that happened, I noticed that a lot of people would use kindness as kind of a reason for why that happened. It's not the act of kindness that was the problem. It was not being aware of the situation that was around you. And I'm not going to blame the victims at this point, but I'm just saying that I think going forward in the future, that humans in general can be more aware, alert, conscientious, and, just focused on each other as well as yourself. It's about having multi-dimensional perspective not just having kind of a one-dimensional perspective of yourself, but seeing all around you. And that's what the elves kind of power that they have. They have this higher attuned sensory awareness of not only themselves and their environment, but also the other beings around them and what they need. And I think that that's where humans can get to, and what I believe that the elves can be an inspiration for. So thank you all for joining today, and I will see you all on the next video. We'll talk about part 2 of this. I'm just going to go back and take a few hours and listen into this book and write down all the examples of book 2 in Lord of the Rings. So everyone enjoy your day, and I will see you all on the next video. Han and Lei.